talking about fretting, and honestly, even if you're not, scale length is important. And what is it? And we've got a camera set up over here for kind of a close-up view. And we're going to see if we can bring that in now. All right, so scale length. At the top of the neck, we have a nut. This thing up here that the strings go over is called the nut. And then the strings come down and they go over another thing here called the bridge. The distance between those 2 points are what make up the scale length of the instrument. And on any guitar you might have, or cigar box guitar you've built or bought, let me get my handy dandy ruler. So if I measure this, this is 25.5 inches, which is kind of one of the big standard scales for cigar box, or not cigar box guitars, for any guitar. 25.5 inches, it's the scale that Fender uses for Telecasters and Stratocasters. It's the scale that this old Alvarez that I Frankensteined used. So that's a common scale length. Now, scale length determines where the frets go. It's all based on a mathematical formula, but fortunately, you don't have to worry about that mathematical formula if you don't want to, as I'll show you in a moment. Shorter scale, higher pitch, longer scale, lower pitch. The mathematical formula, if you are doing something wacky, or maybe like that diddly bow, you just do it and then later you think, I need to mark some frets out on this thing. Where are they? Where should they go? We have a fretting calculator for free on cigarboxguitar.com that you can use to determine where the frets should go. So you'd measure from nut to bridge, like I did on that diddly bow. Say, okay, 27.5 inches. You'd go onto the fret calculator, type in 27.5, and it'll show you first fret goes here at 1.635 inches, and the second fret goes here and on down. So you can figure these things out and make it work. Fortunately, you don't have to. We have created some tools at Gitty, available through cbgitty.com. We have fretting scale templates that basically show you exactly where things go for different scale lengths. I brought 2 in. This template goes from 24 inch up to 25.5 inch. So you got 24, 24.5, 25, 25.5. Then I brought the shorter one in that covers from soprano up through concert ukulele, which this is 15 inch, and a couple of mandolin scales. On this neck here, the nut, because we did a recessed headstock, here we go. You see that's a recessed or notched down headstock. The nut's going to be right up here on top of the neck, or it's going to be right here glued in if you're going to do a bone nut set in there. So I would take my neck here, 25-inch scale, and put it so that the inside edge of the nut marker on this template is right where I want the inside edge of the nut to be on the headstock. So the neck side or the body edge of where the nut's going to be. Because remember, scale length is the total vibrating length of the screen from nut to bridge. Alright, so then I've got it lined up here where the edge of the nut will be, and then I can just mark my fret locations. Marked, probably can't see the marks on there, but trust me, it's marked. And then you can use a tool like a square. I have a machinist square here, and you can line it up like so, and just kind of score your fret marks across there based on those marks you made. Now, that's using our printed templates. We have something at CB Gitty that makes it even easier, and I won't go through the whole thing with it, but these are laser cut acrylic templates. Basically what you do with these, they've got a bigger slot cut for the nut up here at the top, and then each fret has its slot, and we even have the location marker dots there. So say this was a fretboard for a cigar box guitar that I wanted to fret, and I knew that the nut was going to rest right up here at the top edge. So with that lined up, all I've got to do is get that pencil through there. This is 25-inch scale length right here, so it's the same scale length that I did by hand with the printed template. And like I say, these acrylic templates also have the position holes marked, so you can get that lined up on there and even come in here and If you were, just doing it simple, you could use a Sharpie or something to get in there and make your position markers. So if you're making a cigar box guitar with this neck, you've got to think about where that bridge is going to end up. Right now it's marked right here. That's 25 inches from nut to bridge. So you couldn't mount this neck like that on this box because the bridge would be off the end of the box and that would not be good. So you position this neck on this box. Generally you don't want it too close to the back edge because remember that bridge is what vibrates. It gives the string vibration to the box lid, which gives you your sound. So generally you would try to position that so that it's an inch or two in from any edge of the box, and that's where your bridge will end up going on the box lid once this thing's put together. So the nut location and the scale length determines where the frets go and where the bridge will go. So last week we covered scale lengths, picking a scale length, what scale length means, and how to mark a neck for fretting. So these are the same 2 necks and 1 fretboard that I started on last week. And Nick, if you can bring in the close-up camera here. Last week we marked these for fretting. So if you look there, you can see I've got some pencil lines drawn on this neck, and that was marked out to a 25-inch scale. The next step is to cut your fret slots. You got to cut perfectly spaced slots in this neck for the frets to seat into. To do that, you need a proper saw. One of the key considerations is how wide the kerf is. Now, the kerf is basically how wide of a slot this saw will cut based on how the teeth are set here on the blade. Some saws have a wider kerf. Like think of an old hand saw. That's going to cut a slot possibly up to almost 1/8 of an inch wide, or at least a 1/16. Way too wide for frets. Then you get down into coping saws and all kinds of different saws. At CB Gitty, we sell this saw as our fretting saw. It took us a long time to find just the right one. We finally found it, and now this is what we sell. It cuts a perfectly width slot for accepting most common fret wires. Now, maybe the key thing out of this whole broadcast that I can recommend is that you get yourself a digital caliper. Bring it over here, Nick. I'll try to come in. This is a digital caliper. There it is. I think I got this one from Harbor Freight. It was only 20 bucks or so. And what this is used for is measuring how wide things are. The jaws open up, and you can put that over a saw blade, a tuner shaft, a screw shaft, anything you want, and it'll show you on the readout here how big the measurement is. So, like on the saw blade here, I can turn on my digital caliper, bring it here, and see that this is about 0.02 inches wide. 0.02, 20 thousandths of an inch, which is just about perfect for fret slot cutting. Too wide and the frets won't stay in, too narrow, you won't be able to get it in to start with. So just for example, here's another little pole saw that I had. I think my grandpa gave it to me. And if I measure this, it's only like 0.013. So 13 thousandths of an inch, way too narrow. If you cut a slot with this, you probably won't be able to get the fret wire started into it. Now this one, I think, came from Harbor Freight. It's another pole saw style. And if I measure this, it's like 0.030, too wide. If you cut a slot with this, the fret wire is going to pop back out. It won't stay put. You'd have to use glue and all sorts of messy stuff to try to keep it in there. So finding a saw, CB Gitty, we sell these for less than 20 bucks. It's a high quality saw, and it actually cuts on the push stroke, which might sound weird, but it's a good thing. I believe it allows more control when starting a fret slot. And we'll get to the actual cutting here in a minute. The purpose of a miter box, or mitering method, is to make sure you cut a straight fret slot without a bunch of wiggle or wobble to it, because any sort of wiggle or wobble while you're cutting can cause the slot to be wider than you want, especially at the ends. That makes it harder for the fret to stay in place. So, the simplest way to cut a straight slot, and I've got a cigar box guitar neck here. It looks like this one might be ash, so good hard wood, which is always recommended for slotting or for cigar box guitar necks. And I'm basically taking a scrap of 1x2 wood here, which came off of another neck, and I'll try to get things arranged here so that this top-down camera will show it. I'm going to just try to hold this little block of wood here exactly on this line, and I'm going to try to cut a straight slot with it. Now, this is not the most recommended method, I will say, but in a pinch, if you're really steady, and with this CB Gitty saw, it cuts on the push stroke, so I can actually get the slot started with several pull strokes. And once you got a slot started here, it's a lot easier to then actually cut the fret slot itself. And when you're cutting, you want to try to keep your saw motion as perpendicular to the neck as possible. So Christopher had asked about slot depth. It can vary, you know, there's no hard and fast rule as to what it should be. You look at your fret wire that you have, and I don't have any fret wire here because we're not getting to fret installation until next week. But you can measure what's called the tang depth. You can measure the tang depth with your calipers and see that, oh, it's got a tang depth of about 1/16 of an inch. Then you want to make sure your fret slot is at least 1/16, whatever that tang depth is, plus a little extra. Because if you don't saw the slot deep enough, your fret wire isn't going to seat down into it smoothly. If you saw your fret slot too deep, you're going to weaken the neck or weaken the fretboard because you're cutting through more of it. So generally on this one, I went down about, well, hey, I can use my digital calipers here to figure out exactly how far I went down. Handy tool that they are. I went down just about 1/8 of an inch. So I went down probably a little further than I needed to. Honestly, unless you're building super high-end fancy stuff, you don't need to worry about overcutting a little bit. You know, if they vary a little bit, you can always put some wood filler in there to make it look a little better. So the next step would be to use a square of some kind. And we go back to the close-up for this. So I've got a machinist square here, which is a small stainless steel square used by tool makers. And then I've got a larger carpenter's square. And I'm going to show you that you can use these because they seat against the edge of the neck, and you get it lined up to that fret slot like so. Alright, so as I said last time, I'm holding this square nice and snug here, and because of how the square works, this back part here sits against the side of the neck nice and tight, so you're guaranteed a direct 90-degree angle there. I do a couple of pull strokes to get the slot started, and then I finish it off like so, taking it down about somewhere between 1/16 and 1/8 of an inch. You can always take it deeper, but you can't make it shallower once it's cut. Alright, so that was using a machinist square. A carpenter's square works about the same. It's a little bigger, maybe a little more unwieldy, but you get it right on the line there. Start your slot, a couple of pull strokes, and then you can finish it. The easiest, in my opinion, and our recommended way of doing it, which would be to use a dedicated miter box. And it just so happens that we have one that was designed here at CB Gitty. This was turned out, and we made this to be used for cigar box guitars. It's just a hair over 1.5 inches wide. And you can see it here, and it comes as a kit actually. These are tab-in slot sides here that get tabbed in, and you can glue them in place. We put some screw holes in the bottom there that you can use it to mount to a larger board. Alright, so using this, I've got it put together, and you see it has this slot and this opening cut here. That is where the saw goes. So you can see I can line up my marked lines with those slots in the saw, And in doing so, where's my fret saw? There it is. Line it up, and then because of how this miter box is made, I can actually squeeze these sides. So I've got the slot lined up, I'm squeezing these sides together to hold the neck, and at that point you can make quick work of it. And we've got these oval openings cut here so that you can flip it up and see how deep your slot is. It also works for a fretboard as opposed to just a neck. Like here we have a fretboard, it's about 3/8 of an inch wide, and it's a hair over 1.5 inches, so it's a snug fit. But I can get that in there and still get my saw started and turn it up to see how deep the slot is. That's about right. Pull that out, and I've got a pretty perfectly cut fret slot there in what will be a fretboard on a cigar box guitar. If you're getting into it for the first time, practice on a piece of scrap. That's another piece of great advice. You know, if you've got some 1x2 cutoffs around, try it out. Get used to it before you tackle your special neck or your special fretboard that you want to use on your guitar. What to do? Use the right saw. Find a saw. We recommend ours, of course, but it can be any saw. Lowe's sells some that'll work. So the correct saw, it'll cut the correct width slot. Use a miter of some kind, whether it's a square, a block of wood, and you could, of course, clamp this using a squeeze clamp before you started. We recommend the CB Gitty miter box. That's up to you. So use the right sort of saw and the right miter box, or some sort of miter, and you should get to the point where you can consistently cut nice, smooth, straight fret slots. All right, so these are some of the cigar box guitar necks that we sell pre-fretted and ready to go. This one, Farley just finished installing the frets. You can see she's cut the fret wire off at the ends, but no filing yet.
That's
you
right.
would not want to try to play this because you would end up with bloody hands because those sharp fret ends are sticking out. So before you jump in, Farley, a couple of things. We sell on our website, cbgitty.com, and we use here in the shop the CB Gitty fretting hammer. This is a 12-ounce dead blow hammer. There's some shot in there that makes it dead blow, which means it doesn't bounce as easily as a normal hammer would. And it's got a brass face, which is softer and doesn't dent the fret wire. Because most fret wire is made from a nickel silver alloy. And if you use a steel hammer on it, it's going to make a dent. Brass doesn't. So this is the CB Gitty fretting hammer. The other thing that makes it a lot easier is a set of end nippers. And that is what you use to get in there and cut the fret wire off after it's been pounded in. And we'll be showing you all of this in just a moment. Now you can buy them. We don't sell them. Certain McDonald has them. They're very expensive, and that's what these are. But you can also make them, and there's a link, hopefully Shane will be posting to an Amazon listing for a pair of basic 8-inch end nippers. And what you can do, and these are the ones we used here for many years. If you come in close, Nick, I actually ground down the top here to make it a very fine flush cut blade there, so that you can get right in close and nip that fret wire off as close to the wood as possible, because that makes the filing job a lot easier after the fact. Now you can get by with, let's see if Glenn has a set of, you could use a standard pair of side cutters to do it, and you could get pretty close. You have some more filing work to do after the fact, but using a pair of modified end nippers definitely takes a little bit of the pain out of fret. So, Farley, you're going to take some of our medium fret wire, which I did not prepare a link for, but this is standard medium nickel silver fret wire. It's the one we sell the most of, and the one we use the most in the shop here at CB Gitty.
Yep, and I
just
run it through this little radius bender.
We have a radius machine here that puts a little bit of a curve into the fret wire. These fret wire lengths are straight. If you put it through this machine, like so, it puts a little bit of an arc into it, or what's called a radius. And that helps the ends stay down into the fret slot when they're installed. And you can do that same sort of thing by hand. just by kind of doing this, gently and carefully holding it and just kind of pulling it through while putting a little bit of torque on it, you can increase the radius of that even more. So you don't have to have every fancy tool. We have them here because we do a lot of fretting, but you can get by with, you know, with just your hands, with basic tools you already have, and get into fretting. So just kind of walk us through what you're doing here, Farley.
All right, I clamped my neck down. I've already slotted it, and put the radius in the medium fret wire.
So you line up the first piece of fret wire in the
Right.
first slot, pretty close to the edge.
Right, it can stick out a little bit because
Right.
I'm gonna.
And then starting on this forward side and working back,
Right.
gently taps it in, then takes the end nippers and nips it right off, right up next to the wood. Now, last week, if you remember, I was talking about cutting the fret slots and how getting the right saw width is very important so that the slot you end up with isn't too wide, isn't too narrow, and when they're just right, that fret wire is seated in there nice and firm. It has little, on what's called the tang, which is the part that comes down below the wire and goes into the slot, there are little nubs there that kind of bite into the wood and help hold it in place. So the right fret slot width using the right saw makes this part a lot easier. You don't need glue to hold it in place or anything like that. 17 frets.
Yeah. And then I give a little tap on either side when I'm done.
So to help make sure those ends stay down, she just gives them a little finishing tap. Then you go back over and clean up that side with the nippers.
Yes.
So it can make the filing, and again, the whole reason for using the nippers is to make the filing easier. Now here in the Gitty shop, we've got some little speedier ways for doing some of the manual part. We've got a big edge sander over there that we use for smoothing and beveling the fret ends, so then it just takes a little bit of finish work with the fine file. But if you're doing this at home, nipping both ends down, and I even put a little angle when I'm nipping it, because that makes the beveling process easier, which we'll get into next week. But beveling is basically you file an angle onto the end of each fret so that it makes it easier to smooth them off. And the goal of all of that is to make it feel good on your hand when you're playing. You know, you don't want sharp edges, you don't want pokey bits on there, you want it nice and smooth. No pokey bits. That's today's lesson. Today we're covering filing the ends. Very important to do, and to do as well and as good as you can. So I've got a neck here. This is one of our CB Gitty cigar box guitar necks that we make up. This one has an extended headstock, and I have installed the frets. Now I've trimmed them off nice and flush with my end nippers, but I have not done any filing. So let's see. We'll get this. I'm going to clamp it right to the tabletop here, and we've got my handy dandy Irwin squeeze clamps. All right, so tools. Using the right tools, very important. For filing the ends, for getting the ends flush and smooth, I recommend a fine tooth or fine cut metal file. I know you probably can't see that very well. This is a diamond file. It doesn't actually have the grooves. It has tiny pieces of diamond on there. These work really well, but these are a lot cheaper and more readily available. You can go to Lowe's or Home Depot. You can get sets of files that'll have one of these in it and have one of the others we're going to talk about in a minute in there. So basically, this is a single cut file. The grooves all go in one way. Some are double cut, which is a little more aggressive of a cut. My recommendation for filing your fret edges like this is that you don't use too aggressive of a file. You don't want it to take off more material than you're expecting, because it's very easy to overdo it and get down into the wood of your neck and start taking wood off, and that's not really what you want to do when you're filing your fret ends. You see, I've got the neck clamped down kind of parallel with the bench, and that allows me to take my metal file and just kind of start working it along here. And you can feel when it's gripping the metal of the fret ends as opposed to the wood of the neck. And you can hear it too. And I'm just kind of running that along. It's touching the wood, it's taking off a tiny amount of wood, but as long as you're fairly gentle, that's not really anything to worry too much about, because a fine cut metal file like this isn't going to take off that much. And then pretty much do it until there is no, you don't feel or hear it taking off any more metal. So now already, I've taken off those sharp ends that were left when I used the end nippers to cut the fret wire. It makes a very sharp end. Will just tear your hands right up. So even with this, it's a great improvement. The next step is to bevel the fret ends. And basically that means if this is the end of the fret wire sticking out, you want to put a bevel on the end to kind of angle up to the full height of the fret. It makes it a lot easier on the fingers. It makes it feel a lot better when you're playing. So this can be done by hand. You can take your same metal file and kind of attack the fret ends at an angle, being careful not to gouge your wood. You don't want to gouge the wood of your neck like I did there a little bit. That's all right. So I'm putting roughly a 15-degree bevel onto the ends of these frets. Again, we're angling them up away from the edge at about 15 degrees or so. And that's going to make them a lot easier to smooth and round in the next step. Now, I'm doing it by hand. Here at CB Gitty, we came up with a tool. This is a fret beveling file. You can see it has a file set in there at an angle. And what this allows you to do is put a nice uniform angle on all of those fret ends, because this runs flat against the top of the frets. I need to move my clamp there to get those front ones. And when you see it starting to produce sawdust, you know you've gone in far enough. So now all of those fret ends have a nice uniform angle on them. And at this stage it's feeling even better. Honestly, you could probably get away with just that. But I say make the frets feel as good as you can, because that's one of the measures, in my opinion, of a well-made guitar. How does the neck feel? How do the frets feel? It shows that the builder took that extra step, went that extra distance to make a playable, a highly playable, comfortable guitar. So it's a good thing to get into. Now, the next step is to actually kind of file off and take the edges off of that beveled angle we just cut into the fret wire. The edges on that bevel are sharp. There are different, well, not many, but there are two ways you can do this. You can buy a dedicated fret end filer like we did from our good friends over at Stewie Mac. It's made specifically for the purpose. Or you can take a regular triangle, what's sometimes called a rat tail file. Actually, that may be the round version. But a little triangle file that come in multi-file sets from Lowe's. And if you sand off one of the edges to make it nice and smooth and rounded, that'll pretty much do the same thing. That's pretty much what this is. It has one rounded edge here that's nice and smooth and doesn't have any file teeth on it. And so what that allows is this. Hopefully that's coming through. I'm running it along the edge of the bevel on both sides. First one way, then the other. And I'm basically smoothing that end off, rounding it right off. Now you don't want to push down too hard there because you'll gouge the wood. And if you're using a homemade file, you really want to make sure you've taken all of the fret teeth off of where you're rubbing that on the wood, because that'll gouge right down real quick. But basically you kind of get into the groove of it, and every time you see, I'm feeling it with my finger. File, feel, file, feel. So I can tell, all right, that one's smooth. Move it along. All right, that one's good. Because you're just taking that sharp edge off, you're taking the burrs off, you're making it so it's going to feel really good on the player's fingers once this neck is put onto a guitar and starts being played. But there's one more step you can do, and that's to take a little fine grit sandpaper. This is 220 I like to have a sheet of even finer, like a 320 or this is still 220, but it's a little worn down. And you can just kind of use that to just lightly polish. It can help take any metal marks off the wood from when you were filing. And then there's actually another step we do out in the Gitty shop, and that's some steel wool, I believe, just to kind of polish up and take some of the scuff marks off. But that makes for a nice smooth fret job there that you can be proud of. You know, because our goal here, the ones we do at CB Gitty, we want a conventional guitar player to be able to pick it up and be like, yeah, that feels good, man. That feels like what I'm expecting.